All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We are tackling episode 5 in our Mastering Microsoft Azure Fundamentals series. And this time we are diving into a topic that is pretty much essential for anyone working with the cloud these days, and that is understanding the different cloud service types. IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, you've definitely heard of these.
Yeah, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS kind of ring to them, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
But, they're not just trendy buzzwords or anything.
Right.
They're actually super fundamental models that underpin how we use and interact with the cloud, particularly in the context of Azure. And, if you've ever felt a bit overwhelmed or maybe even a little confused by these terms,
Yeah.
you're not alone.
Yeah.
Even seasoned cloud professionals can sometimes trip up over these distinctions. So today, we really want to demystify these service types. And what's exciting is that the sources we're exploring offer a really clear and practical breakdown.
Absolutely. And our goal today is to move past just those abstract acronyms. We're going to give you a concrete understanding of what each of these service types actually offers in practical terms.
Right.
And maybe even more importantly, when you might want to choose one over the other for your specific needs, because there's no one size fits all here, right?
Definitely not. It's all about matching the right service model to your specific requirements and really optimizing your cloud experience.
Sure.
So hopefully by the end of this deep dive, you'll feel much more confident navigating the cloud landscape and choosing the services that best suit you, your organization, or your projects.
Great. So let's unpack this, shall we?
Let's do it.
And let's start with what I think is often seen as kind of the foundational level, and that's infrastructure as a service, or as we know it, IaaS. Now, our sources emphasize that IaaS offers the greatest flexibility and the highest level of control over your cloud resources. Now, what does it actually mean practically?
So imagine it like this. You're working with Azure, right? And in the IaaS model, Azure as the cloud provider manages all of that core infrastructure for you. I talk about the physical hardware like the servers, networking equipment, everything that powers the cloud.
Right.
Azure also takes care of the internet connectivity that lets you access those resources and, of course, the physical security of the data centers where all of this stuff lives.
So all the physical stuff is all taken care of.
Exactly. And you as the user then have control over pretty much everything else that sits on top of that infrastructure.
Oh, okay.
So think about your operating systems. Do you want to run Windows Server or Linux?
Oh.
That's your choice.
Oh, cool.
You get to configure your network how you want it, manage your databases, your storage. You have this wide degree of control over how you set up and run your applications and workloads in the cloud.
That's really interesting. I was reading one of the sources and it used a really helpful analogy. It talked about IaaS being like leasing hardware in a cloud data center, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. You're essentially renting the space and the equipment, but then you get to decide exactly how you want to use it.
Okay, I see. So it gives you that flexibility. But with all this control, I guess comes a kind of corresponding responsibility, right?
Oh, absolutely. This is where we run into the very important concept of the shared responsibility model, which applies to all cloud service types, but it's perhaps most pronounced with IaaS.
Right.
So Azure takes care of the underlying physical infrastructure, all the stuff we talked about, and they ensure that the platform itself is secure and reliable. But everything else from installing your operating systems, configuring them, patching them, keeping them up to date, ensuring the security of your applications and your data, all of that becomes your responsibility.
Wow. Okay. So maximum control, but it seems like there's a lot of operational work to do on your end as well. So when would IaaS actually be the right choice then?
So there are a couple of key scenarios where IaaS really shines. One common use case is what's known as a lift and shift migration. So let's say you have applications and systems running in your own data center today on your own servers, and you want to move them to the cloud.
Okay.
IaaS allows you to essentially replicate a similar environment up in Azure and essentially move those operations over. The advantage here is that you're working with familiar operating systems and configurations, which can make the transition smoother. It's almost like you're just moving to a different physical location, but the underlying setup remains largely the same.
Right. You're not having to completely rebuild everything from scratch.
Exactly. And that can be really attractive for organizations that want to, quickly get into the cloud. However, while lift and shift can be an effective initial strategy, it's important to note that it often doesn't fully leverage the inherent advantages of the cloud. As you mature in your cloud journey, you might want to consider refactoring applications for PaaS, or serverless architectures, to truly capitalize on the scalability, cost efficiency, and operational benefits of cloud-native designs. So think of lift and shift as a potential first step, not necessarily the ultimate destination for all of your workloads.
Right. So it's sort of like, moving your entire office to a new building where the floor plan is the same. You still have to unpack and set everything up, but at least the fundamental structure is familiar. What's another situation where IaaS would be a good fit?
Another common use case for IaaS is testing and development. So imagine you're a software developer and you need to quickly spin up different environments to test new code, new software versions, or develop new features. IaaS gives you the control to set up those environments exactly the way you need them. You can configure your operating systems, your software, your dependencies, everything. And what's really great is that you can quickly start and stop these environments, only paying for the resources you consume while they're running. It gives you that agility and cost effectiveness for your development workflows.
Right. So IaaS seems like a really good choice when you need that granular level of control and customization. And particularly, when you want to get things up and running quickly without having to worry about setting up all of the underlying infrastructure from scratch. Okay, so we've laid the foundation with IaaS, but let's move on to the next level, which is platform as a service, or PaaS. And the resources describe PaaS as being kind of in between just leasing that raw infrastructure like we talked about within PS and then having a fully ready-to-use solution. So what's the key difference here with PaaS?
So the main distinction is that with PaaS, the cloud provider, so Azure, starts to manage more of the underlying complexity for you. So in addition to taking care of all that physical infrastructure, the security, the connectivity, like with IaaS, Azure now also manages the operating systems you use, the middleware.
Middleware, yeah.
Think of it like the software that helps your applications talk to each other, connect to databases, and the development tools you might use to actually build your applications, and even certain business intelligence services. So you don't have to worry about patching and updating those underlying components. Azure takes care of all of that.
Wow. So it's like a more complete platform already set up and ready for you to build upon.
Yeah, exactly. One source even highlights that it's ideally suited for offering a comprehensive development environment without the hassle of maintaining all the development infrastructure.
Yeah.
That sounds like a pretty sweet deal for developers, doesn't it?
Yeah. It does. I mean, it frees them up to really focus on building and deploying those applications rather than having to worry about all the underlying infrastructure management. It's almost like with IaaS, you're managing the entire server, right?
Yeah.
But with PaaS, you're really focusing on the applications and the data running on that server while Azure takes care of the server itself.
That's a great way to think about it.
Now, when it comes to our shared responsibility model, how does that change in the PaaS world? Because it sounds like the provider is taking on more of the load here.
You're absolutely right. With PaaS, it becomes much more of a shared responsibility. So Azure continues to manage that physical infrastructure, the connectivity, the operating systems, the middleware, databases, and the development tools. But now, depending on the specific PaaS service you're using, the responsibility for things like configuring your network within your cloud environment, securing your applications, and even managing your directory infrastructure might fall on you or be shared between you and Azure.
Okay, so there's still some responsibility on the user side, but it's definitely less than with IaaS.
Right. There's a good analogy in one of the sources that compares PaaS to a domain-joined machine. So think of it like your work computer. Your IT department handles all the updates, the maintenance of the machine itself, but you're still responsible for how you use it, the files you store on it, and making sure you don't install any rogue software.
That's a really good analogy. So less control than IaaS, but also considerably less management overhead. Seems like a pretty good trade-off for a lot of scenarios. So what are some typical use cases where PaaS really excels?
One of the primary use cases is as a development framework. PaaS really empowers developers to build cloud-native applications more easily. Think of it like this. Azure provides all these pre-built software components, services, tools that developers can use to build or customize their applications. One source compared it to creating an Excel macro, where you're leveraging those built-in features and functionalities.
Yeah, I see. So you're not having to write everything from scratch.
Exactly. And because these PaaS environments are built for the cloud, they often come with benefits like automatic scalability, high availability, and support for multiple users, all baked in. So developers don't have to spend as much time building those features themselves. They can focus on the unique aspects of their application.
Right. So it really streamlines the development process and allows developers to be more productive.
Yeah.
Okay, what's another key area where PaaS shines?
Well, another powerful area is in the world of analytics or business intelligence. Azure offers a whole suite of tools delivered as a service, as PaaS, that allow businesses to analyze their data, understand patterns and trends, and even make predictions about the future. And this can be really valuable for improving forecasting accuracy, making better decisions about product design, optimizing investment strategies, and all without having to set up and manage the complex infrastructure that typically underpins these kinds of analytics capabilities.
So PaaS really sounds like it hits that sweet spot for developers and data scientists who need access to powerful tools and capabilities without having to manage all that underlying infrastructure. Now let's move on to the final piece of our cloud service model puzzle. Software as a Service, or SaaS. And the sources describe SaaS as the most comprehensive cloud service model from a product perspective. So what does that mean for the average user?
Well, with SaaS, you're essentially using a fully developed application that's hosted and managed by the cloud provider. Think of everyday examples like your email, Gmail, Outlook.com, online financial software, messaging apps like Slack or Microsoft Teams,
Right.
or even connectivity software like VPNs. The key here is that you're interacting directly with the application itself, and you don't have to worry about any of the underlying infrastructure or platform management.
So no servers to set up, no operating systems to install, no databases to manage, none of that.
Nope, the provider takes care of all of that behind the scenes. And the source highlights that while SaaS offers the least flexibility in terms of customization and control compared to IaaS and PaaS, it's also the simplest to set up and operate. Typically you just sign up for an account and you start using the application. It's designed for ease of use.
Absolutely. It's really the most user-friendly cloud model. You don't need any technical expertise to deploy or manage it. You just focus on using the software to do what you need to do.
So when we think about our shared responsibility model, where does that fall with SaaS? It sounds like the provider is shouldering the majority of the responsibility here.
You got it. In the SaaS model, the cloud provider takes on the most responsibility by far. They handle everything from the physical security of the data centers, the power, the network connectivity, to the development, maintenance, and security of the application itself. And your responsibilities are generally limited to managing your data within the application.
Okay.
Controlling which devices you use to access it, managing your user accounts and permissions, things like that. Okay, so it's essentially a hands-off approach from a management perspective. You just use the service. What are some of the common scenarios where we see SaaS solutions?
Well, the source mentions a few common examples: email and messaging platforms, as we talked about, business productivity applications like online document editors, spreadsheets, collaboration tools. Those are often delivered as SaaS. And then there's also financial and expense tracking software. Those are typically SaaS applications as well.
Right, so chances are we're all using SaaS applications every day without even really thinking about it. Okay, so we've taken a pretty deep dive into IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. Now, if we were to sort of sum up the key differences that we should remember when we're considering these models, what would those be?
I think the main takeaway is that these models represent a spectrum of control and responsibility. With IaaS, you have the most control, but also the most responsibility.
Right.
PaaS is kind of that middle ground where the provider manages more of the infrastructure, allowing you to focus on your applications and data. And then with SaaS, you have the least control, but also the least responsibility because the provider takes care of pretty much everything. And your primary focus is on using the application itself.
Yeah, it's all about finding the right balance for your specific needs and your technical capabilities, because understanding where you sit on that spectrum is really important for making informed decisions about which cloud services to use.
Exactly. That understanding gives you the power to choose the model that aligns with your priorities, your comfort level with management, and the type of application or workload you're working with.
This has been a really helpful conversation, I think, and it really sheds light on these different cloud service models. I especially like how we went beyond just those abstract acronyms and really explored the practical implications of each. It helps to see them as, different levels of interaction with the cloud rather than just confusing jargon.
Absolutely. And grasping this foundational concept can really help you understand and navigate the entire Azure ecosystem more effectively.
Right.
Because once you have this framework in place, you can start to explore all of the other amazing services and capabilities that Azure offers. So it really sets you up for success as you continue to learn and grow your cloud skills.
So as we wrap up, I think the key takeaway for our listeners is that when you're considering using cloud services, one of the most important questions to ask yourself is, what level of management overhead am I comfortable with? You
Yeah.
know, does having maximum control with IaaS appeal to you, even if it means you're responsible for more? Or do you prefer the simplicity and reduced management of SaaS? Or maybe that balanced approach with PaaS is the right fit. It's really a personal decision and it depends on your specific circumstances, but it's a question worth pondering as you embark on your cloud journey.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, this brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, part of our Mastering Microsoft Azure Fundamentals series. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg. If you're eager to dive deeper into the world of Azure Fundamentals, we highly recommend checking out the book Mastering Azure Fundamentals AZ900 Exam Prep.
Great resource.
Yeah, it's available in both paperback and ebook formats, and you can find it at learnazureforfree.com. Or if you prefer, you can also pick it up on Amazon, and we'll include a handy link in the description for easy access. Thanks for joining us today, and until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the cloud.
See you next time.